The restaurant was too quiet for a Thursday night. Crystal chandeliers glowed above linen-draped tables, the hum of conversation rising and falling like tides against the polished marble floor. Every fork clinked politely, every laugh was restrained. Waiters glided between chairs as though their shoes never touched the ground. At the far corner table sat Elias Kane. Alone. His suit was tailored midnight silk, the kind stitched by hand in Milan for men who had nothing but money to spend. In front of him, a perfectly seared filet mignon cooled untouched beside a glass of water that hadn't been sipped. A folded napkin sat across his lap, but his hands were motionless. He stared not at his plate, but at the golden rim of the empty wineglass, as if it contained something only he could see. It was the third Thursday in a row he had come to this restaurant, and the third Thursday the staff had whispered to one another about him, the mute billionaire who never ordered dessert, never spoke a word, and never smiled. Some said he hadn't spoken since the accident. Some said he couldn't. Others said he simply had nothing left worth saying. Patrons watched him with sideways glances, trying not to be obvious. To them he was an untouchable figure, a man carved from money and tragedy, seated at a table meant for two but always dining alone. And then she appeared. A small girl, no older than 7, slipped between the chairs like she belonged there. Her braids swung as she walked, the purple beads at the ends clicking softly against one another. Her dress was second-hand, too large at the shoulders, faded at the hem. Her sneakers squeaked on the polished floor, a sound so ordinary it jarred against the hush of expensive conversations. She stopped at Elias Kane's table and tilted her head, studying him with eyes as steady as glass. Then she said, in a voice clear enough to cut through the clatter of plates and silverware. "You look like the richest man here, but the loneliest, too." The room froze. Every fork paused in midair. Every whispered conversation died. A waiter nearly dropped a tray of champagne flutes. The maitre d', across the room, straightened like he'd been struck by lightning. And Elias Kane, the man who had not spoken a word in years, the man who had built an empire in silence, lifted his eyes to hers as if woken from a dream. He blinked. His jaw tightened. His hands, which had been still against the table, curled into loose fists. It wasn't anger that moved across his face. It wasn't even embarrassment. It was something rawer, something heavier. Surprise. The girl shifted her weight from one foot to the other, unbothered by the collective gasp of the restaurant. She wasn't mocking him. She wasn't curious about his money or his fame. She was simply honest. Her words hung in the air like smoke. A man at the next table whispered too loudly, "Whose child is that?" His wife tugged at his sleeve, shushing him. A pair of businessmen snickered into their wineglasses. But Elias didn't look at them. His gaze stayed locked on the girl. For the first time in months, perhaps years, something cracked in the billionaire's expression. His lips parted slightly, his breath caught as though he might speak. But no words came. They hadn't in a long time. His silence was his shield, and he did not lower it easily. The girl frowned, leaning closer to him. "Do you hear me? Or are you pretending not to?" Another gasp rippled across the dining room. Someone laughed nervously. The billionaire didn't move. His throat worked as though he wanted to answer, but still nothing came. Instead, his eyes lowered to the small, frayed cuffs of her dress, then to her sneakers with their peeling soles. Then he looked back at his untouched meal. Contrast hit like a blow. His world, fine wine, expensive cutlery, solitude wrapped in wealth, against hers, innocence, poverty, but an honesty too sharp to ignore. The waiter nearest to them rushed forward, whispering frantically, "Miss, you can't disturb the guests here." But the girl didn't budge. She climbed onto the empty chair opposite Elias, folded her small arms on the table, and stared at him as though he were just another lonely man at dinner. She wrinkled her nose. "Food's going to get cold if you keep staring at it." The waiter nearly choked. "Miss." But Elias raised one hand. Just a small, deliberate gesture. The waiter stopped dead in his tracks. The billionaire's hand lowered back to the table. He didn't wave her away. Didn't summon help. He simply allowed her. The restaurant buzzed again, whispers hissing through the air. Some laughed at the absurdity, others frowned at the impropriety. But all of them kept watching. The girl drummed her fingers against the linen. Why don't you talk? You're not shy, are you? You don't look shy. Elias exhaled through his nose. His eyes darkened, then softened, as if he were caught between pain and amusement. Slowly, deliberately, he reached for the silver pen in his breast pocket. He dragged the untouched napkin toward him and scrawled 2 words in precise block letters. I can't. The girl leaned across the table, squinting. She read the words, lips moving soundlessly, then sat back. You can't. Or you won't, she asked. His pen hovered. His eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. Then he wrote again. Both. She tilted her head, braids swinging. That's silly. No one had ever said such a thing to him. Not in boardrooms, not in hospitals, not in the quiet of his penthouse where silence stretched like a prison. People pitied him, or feared him, or envied him. But no one had ever called his silence silly. For a moment, his lips twitched. Not quite a smile. But close. And just like that, the balance of the room shifted. The patrons looked at him differently, some in shock, others in curiosity. The waiter backed away, uncertain. And Elias Kane, the untouchable billionaire who hadn't been moved in years, found himself leaning just slightly toward a girl in a faded dress, her words cutting through the fortress he had built. The restaurant resumed its hum, but the focus never left their table. The girl tapped the sketchbook she carried tucked under her arm. Do you want me to show you how not to look lonely? Elias froze. He didn't nod. He didn't write. But his silence spoke louder than any word. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel entirely alone. The restaurant gradually remembered how to breathe. Glasses clinked again, though softer than before, and conversations restarted in uneven fragments. But every few seconds, eyes darted toward the corner table where a billionaire and a little girl sat facing each other, separated by 40 years and a lifetime of differences. Elias Kane sat rigid, one hand still resting on the silver pen, the other on the napkin where the words, I can't, had been scrawled. His jaw was sharp beneath neatly combed salt and pepper hair. His watch, a limited edition Patek Philippe, glinted beneath the chandelier's light, but his shoulders sagged as though the weight of his suit was heavier than steel. The girl across from him hadn't looked away. She swung her legs beneath the chair, sneakers dangling inches above the floor. Her braids clinked softly with the beads woven into them, beads that caught light like little jewels though their plastic was scratched. She wore a faded denim jacket with one sleeve longer than the other and a patch of a cartoon rabbit stitched awkwardly over a hole. Her name was Amara Johnson. To anyone else, she might have looked out of place in that restaurant. Too small. Too poor. Too free-spirited for a room full of people weighed down by gold watches and tailored dresses. But Amara didn't shrink into the shadows the way her mother always begged her to. She filled the space with curiosity, with honesty, with a kind of bravery most adults had long since buried. Elias tapped the pen against the table twice. He wanted to ask her name, but words wouldn't come. He had learned to live without them. Since the crash 3 years ago, his voice had been lost in smoke and fire, left behind in the wreckage where his wife had died. People said Elias Kane was lucky. Lucky to be alive. Lucky to be rich enough to retreat into silence without losing control of his empire. But he didn't feel lucky. He felt hollow. Words had once been his weapon. He had built companies on speeches that electrified investors, on courtroom battles where his voice carried more weight than gold. Now he was voiceless, and with silence came solitude. The only sound in his world was the echo of things he wished he had said to his wife before the accident. And then Amara had looked him straight in the eye and called him lonely. "Do you always eat alone?" she asked, her voice bright against the hush that lingered around their table. Elias wrote carefully, "Yes." "Why?" "No one to eat with." She frowned as though this was the worst excuse she'd ever heard. "You're rich. You could pay people to eat with you." A chuckle escaped from someone at a nearby table, quickly muffled. Elias didn't glance at them. He only stared at Amara, the corner of his mouth threatening another twitch that was almost a smile. "I don't think you want people who get paid to sit with you," Amara continued matter-of-factly. "That's not family. That's fake family." The word landed hard, pressing against the silence like a stone dropped into a well. Amara pulled the sketchbook from her lap and flipped it open. Crayon drawings filled the pages: houses, stick-figure families, rainbows, and a tall tree with too many branches. She turned to a blank page, pressed her pencil down, and began sketching quickly, her tongue poking from the corner of her mouth in concentration. Elias watched her small hand dart across the paper. The pencil was worn to half its length. She erased with the edge of her palm, smudging graphite across her sleeve. Within minutes, a face began to appear on the page: sharp jaw, heavy brow, tired eyes. His face. She held it up proudly. "See? This is what lonely looks like." He blinked at the drawing. The likeness was crude, a child's attempt, but the sadness etched into those penciled eyes was unmistakable. He glanced down at the untouched steak, then at his reflection in the polished knife. She wasn't wrong. For years, people had tried to tell him who he was now: a survivor, a business titan, a man to be admired for his resilience. But none of them had drawn him this honestly. Across the room, a woman in pearls leaned toward her husband. "Is no one going to stop this? That girl is making a scene." But Elias lifted a hand again. This time the gesture was softer, protective. Amara grinned, flipping to a new page. "Don't worry. I'll draw you again tomorrow. Maybe with a smile this time. Tomorrow." The word snagged in his chest like a hook. No one had spoken to him as though they expected him to exist in their world tomorrow. He had drifted through each day like it was a punishment to be endured, never a life to be lived. But Amara's promise carried a certainty he couldn't ignore. From the kitchen door, a woman burst out, her apron smeared with sauce, her hair tied back hastily. Her eyes scanned the restaurant until they landed on Amara. Horror spread across her face. "Amara," she hissed, rushing forward. The girl didn't flinch. "Hi, Mama." The woman, Naomi Johnson, reached the table, her voice a low storm. "What are you doing? You can't just sit here with..." She froze, noticing Elias Kane at last. Her expression shifted from anger to dread. "Oh, God. Sir, I'm so sorry. She's not supposed to bother customers, especially you." The room bristled with tension. Naomi tugged at Amara's arm, trying to pull her from the chair. "Get up right now." But before the child could stand, Elias slid the napkin forward. New words, crisp in ink. "She's fine." Naomi's mouth parted in shock. The restaurant staff exchanged looks. A billionaire defending a little girl with nothing but a sketchbook. It didn't make sense. It wasn't supposed to happen. But Elias's hand stayed firm on the napkin, his eyes steady. Amara looked up at her mother, triumphant. "Told you he wasn't scary." Naomi hesitated. The man across from her daughter was untouchable, powerful beyond her world's comprehension, but in that moment he didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a man who hadn't had someone sit across from him in far too long. Naomi's grip loosened, but suspicion remained etched in every line of her face. She didn't trust men like him. And she certainly didn't trust what they wanted from little girls like hers. Still, for the first time since the accident, Elias Kane wasn't completely invisible. And for the first time in her short life, Amara Johnson had spoken a truth no adult dared to, that even the richest man in the room could look unbearably, unmistakably lonely. Naomi lingered at the edge of the table, torn between dragging her daughter back into the kitchen and letting her stay just a moment longer. Amara's sketchbook lay open, the rough drawing of Elias staring up at them with hollow, tired eyes. The resemblance was too close for comfort, even if it was only pencil scratches on cheap paper. "Sweetheart," Naomi whispered, her voice urgent. "You can't bother customers. Especially not." She glanced again at Elias, lowering her voice even more, "not him." Amara ignored her, flipping to a blank page. "Mama, I'm not bothering him. He likes it. Look." She gestured at Elias, who still hadn't moved to shoo her away. Naomi's eyes narrowed, searching for any sign of irritation on his face, but he was watching her daughter the way a man watches sunlight slant through a window he hadn't opened in years. Elias raised his pen again, scribbling onto the napkin in precise strokes. "She's right." Naomi's jaw tightened. "Sir, with all due respect." But Elias tapped the words once, insistently, then slid the napkin closer toward her. His gaze held hers long enough to silence further protest. Naomi swallowed hard, her suspicion simmering, but her daughter was already lost in her art. Amara sketched quickly, filling the page with bold, uneven lines. She didn't hesitate the way adults did when they tried to be perfect. Her pencil darted and looped, scratching in shadows, scribbling hair. Elias leaned forward slightly, caught in the rhythm of her small hand at work. After a few minutes, she turned the pad around with a triumphant smile. This time it wasn't his face. It was his table. His plate of untouched steak. His solitary glass of water. And at the center, drawn larger than life, was a stick figure of him, seated alone. Next to him, she had drawn another figure, herself. Smaller, smiling, braids flying outward like sun rays. "You don't look lonely anymore," she announced. The napkin slipped from Elias's fingers. He stared at the drawing, at the simplicity of it, at the audacity of her declaring his solitude solved with a pencil and a smile. He picked up his pen again. This time he didn't write on the napkin. He turned the sketchbook toward himself and carefully, almost reverently, added a word beneath her figures. "Better." Amara's grin widened. She clapped her hands once, delighted. "See, Mama? He does like it." Naomi frowned. "He likes drawings, baby. Not interruptions." But Elias looked up, his eyes meeting Naomi's with a quiet intensity. He tapped the word "better" with the tip of his pen, then looked back at Amara. The little girl, undeterred, leaned over the table. "You should eat your food now. It's rude not to." The corners of Elias's mouth twitched again. He picked up his fork, cutting a small piece of the steak, and ate it. The restaurant buzzed with shocked whispers. For weeks, he had barely touched a meal here. Now he was obeying the command of a 7-year-old. Amara nodded, satisfied, and drew again. This time, she sketched the chandelier above their heads. She colored it in yellow, pressing hard with her crayon until the wax nearly broke. Elias watched her carefully. The chandelier sparkled faintly above them, but on her page, it blazed with exaggerated light, as though she refused to let any corner of the room remain dim. "You don't draw what things look like," Elias wrote on the margin of the page. "You draw how they feel." Amara tilted her head, reading it aloud. Her grin softened into something more thoughtful. "Yeah. Otherwise it's boring." For a long moment, silence pooled between them, not Elias's heavy, suffocating silence, but an easier kind. The kind that felt like waiting for rain on a summer day. Naomi cleared her throat sharply, reminding them both she was still there. Her eyes darted to Elias's untouched checkbook in his breast pocket, then to her daughter's bright smile. "Amara, that's enough. Let's not take advantage of Mr. Kane's patience. Amara sighed dramatically, but obeyed this time, slipping down from the chair. She tugged the sketchbook against her chest. Bye, Mr. Kane. Don't look lonely when I come back. Naomi gasped. Amara. But Elias lifted his hand again, stopping Naomi mid-scold. He pulled another napkin from the holder, scrawling with quick, sharp movements. You're welcome to return. Naomi froze, caught between gratitude and distrust. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. With one hand firm on Amara's shoulder, she guided her back toward the kitchen, shaking her head as though trying to clear away a dangerous dream. The restaurant hummed back to life in their absence. Plates were cleared, waiters moved faster than usual, patrons tried to pretend they weren't whispering about what had just happened. But Elias remained still, eyes on the sketchbook page she had left behind on the table. The stick figures smiled up at him, hand-drawn proof that someone believed he didn't have to sit alone. He slid the sketchbook closer, resting his hand gently against its cover. For years, words had abandoned him. Tonight, a child had replaced them with lines of pencil and wax. And for the first time since the crash, Elias Kane's silence didn't feel like an endless sentence. It felt, just barely, like the beginning of something else. Naomi Johnson didn't sleep well that night. She had dragged Amara home from the restaurant, her heart pounding with a mother's mixture of shame, fear, and something she refused to name, curiosity. She had scolded her daughter, threatened to lock away the sketchbook if she ever embarrassed her like that again, and yet, when Amara had drifted off to sleep, Naomi had stood at the door of her small bedroom, watching her daughter's chest rise and fall, and wondered about the man at that table. Elias Kane. She knew who he was. Everyone did. His face was in the papers whenever one of his companies bought another, his name whispered in the diner where the waitresses gossiped about the rich men who tipped badly. The story of his accident, his wife gone, his voice stolen, was a tale they told with pity and awe. But Naomi had learned early in life not to trust the sorrow of powerful men. It had teeth. So when Thursday came again and Amara tugged on her sleeve after school, eyes wide with hope, Naomi said firmly, "No. We're not going near that place." But Amara's persistence was a force of nature. She wore Naomi down with questions, with pouts, with promises. And by evening, Naomi found herself standing in the foyer of the restaurant once more, her apron still in her bag from her shift, her daughter's small hand squeezing hers with excitement. The maitre d' stiffened when he saw them. "Ms. Johnson. I don't think." Elias Kane lifted his gaze from his usual corner table. He set his pen down, raised his hand slightly, and gestured toward the empty chair across from him. Naomi's breath caught. The audacity. He hadn't spoken a word in years, but with one flick of his wrist, he summoned her daughter like he owned her. Before she could protest, Amara wriggled free and ran to the table. She climbed into the seat opposite Elias, opened her sketchbook, and grinned as though the week between them had been a blink. Naomi marched after her, planting her hands on the back of the chair. "Mr. Kane," she said in a low, firm voice, "with respect, my daughter doesn't belong here. She doesn't belong in your world." Elias studied her for a long moment. His eyes weren't cruel, but they were steady, unwavering. He picked up his pen and wrote on the napkin. "She belongs wherever honesty is needed." Naomi blinked. Heat rose in her cheeks. "You don't know her. You don't know what she's been through. She's just a child. She doesn't understand." Amara interrupted, her pencil scratching across paper. "I understand enough. He's lonely. I told you." Naomi's voice sharpened. "And what does he want in return for your drawings, huh? What do men like him ever want?" The words came out harsher than she intended, and Amara flinched. Elias's expression shifted, a shadow of pain flickering across his face. Slowly, deliberately, he wrote again. "Nothing. Naomi's chest tightened. She wanted to believe it. But she had lived too long in a world where kindness always came with a bill. The waiter arrived with Elias's usual order, placing the plate gently before him, eyes darting nervously between Naomi and the billionaire. Elias didn't touch the food. Instead, he slid a fresh plate across the table to Amara, a small portion of pasta he had requested with a note earlier that day. Amara's eyes widened. For me. Naomi's hand shot out, stopping the fork before it touched her daughter's lips. We don't take charity. But Elias shook his head, tapping the napkin once more. Not charity. Dinner. Something in Naomi's resolve cracked, just a hairline fracture. She glanced at her daughter's eager face, then back at Elias's steady gaze. His silence wasn't predatory, it wasn't demanding. It was something stranger, something almost reverent. Against her better judgment, Naomi let Amara take the bite. The room seemed to exhale as the tension eased. A few patrons turned back to their meals. But Naomi stayed rooted, her hands clenched tight against the chair. When Amara finished her plate, Elias gestured for the sketchbook. Hesitant, she slid it toward him. He flipped through the pages, lingering on the rough portrait she had drawn of him the week before. His pen hovered, then carefully added a small detail, a curved line at the corner of the mouth, softening the sadness. A smile. He turned the book back to her. Amara gasped. See, Mama. He is getting better. Naomi stared at the altered drawing, her throat tight. She wanted to dismiss it as a silly game, but the truth was there, undeniable. The man in the sketch no longer looked like a ghost. Later, as she walked Amara home through the cool evening air, Naomi's mind churned. Elias Kane was dangerous, not because of what he wanted, but because of what he awakened in her daughter. Hope. Trust. Dreams of something more than the cracked sidewalks of their neighborhood. Naomi squeezed Amara's hand harder. Don't get used to this, she warned softly. People like him, they don't stay. Amara tilted her head. Maybe he just needs someone to stay with him. Naomi said nothing. But in her chest, the battle raged, the instinct to protect, and the whisper of something she had buried years ago, possibility. Back at the restaurant, Elias sat alone once more, Amara's sketchbook page open before him. His eyes lingered on the pencil smile he had drawn over his own face. For the first time in years, he wondered if silence might not be the end of his story after all. Elias Kane arrived at the restaurant early. The maitre d' noticed first. Mr. Kane never arrived early. He was punctual, precise, always stepping through the glass doors at 7 o'clock sharp. Tonight, he was there at 6:30, seated at his corner table, eyes not on the menu but on the door. The staff whispered behind the bar, trading theories. Had the billionaire's habits changed? Was he expecting someone? Elias ignored them. His watch ticked softly, each minute dragging longer than the last. He had spent the day distracted, replaying the image of a little girl's braids swinging as she drew him with her stubby pencil. He remembered the way she had insisted he eat, the way she had declared him better after only 2 drawings. The memory was absurd, and yet, it refused to leave him. At 7:05, the doors opened. Amara bounded in, clutching her sketchbook tight. Naomi followed, slower, her expression wary as ever. She scanned the room, ready for rejection, ready for embarrassment. But when she spotted Elias already waiting, already watching, her steps faltered. Amara darted across the floor, her sneakers squeaking against the polished tile. She slid into the seat across from Elias and set the sketchbook down like an offering. I told you I'd come back. Elias's chest loosened. He picked up his pen and wrote on a napkin. I believed you. Amara grinned. Mama didn't. Naomi shot her daughter a sharp look, then met Elias's gaze with cool suspicion. We're not here to waste your time. Elias held her stare a moment longer than was comfortable, then turned back to Amara. He gestured toward the sketchbook. Amara opened to a fresh page. This time, she said, I'm going to draw you smiling for real. Not just pretend. She set her pencil to paper, tongue between her teeth, concentration fierce. Elias leaned forward slightly, his eyes following every stroke. The dining room faded. The murmurs of other patrons blurred. There was only the scratch of pencil and the occasional hum of thought from a child determined to prove a billionaire could be more than his silence. Naomi crossed her arms, standing watch like a sentinel. She had agreed to come only after Amara had begged all week. And she had promised herself she wouldn't relax, not around this man. Minutes passed. Amara finally held up the drawing. This time, Elias's likeness wasn't alone. She had drawn him with her, two figures at the same table, plates of food between them, a chandelier blazing above. And on his face, a smile, wide and unmistakable. Elias stared at the page, throat tightening. For years, he had avoided mirrors, photographs, interviews, any reflection of who he had become. But here, in crooked lines and waxy crayons, was a version of himself he had almost forgotten. His pen hovered over the napkin. Slowly, he wrote. You make me better. Amara's eyes lit up. See, Mama. I told you. Naomi shifted uncomfortably. She wanted to dismiss it, to call it childish nonsense. But the words on that napkin struck her harder than she expected. Elias wasn't done. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a brand new set of colored pencils, still wrapped in cellophane. He slid it across the table to Amara. Her gasp echoed louder than the clinking glasses. For me. Naomi stepped forward quickly. Mr. Kane, that's not necessary. But Amara had already snatched the gift, holding it to her chest. Look, Mama. Real colors. Not just the broken ones from the box at home. Naomi's protest faltered on her tongue. She saw the joy in her daughter's face, the kind she hadn't seen in weeks, maybe months. She swallowed hard. Say thank you, Amara. Thank you. Amara beamed at Elias, and for the briefest second, Naomi thought she saw something flicker across the billionaire's face. Not quite a smile. But close. Elias tapped his pen against the sketchbook, motioning for her to draw with the new pencils. Amara tore open the box eagerly and began filling the page with color, his suit in deep navy, the chandelier in golden yellow, her braids in bright purple. For the first time, her drawings looked alive. The motif was blooming. Naomi sank into the seat beside her daughter, still stiff, still cautious, but unable to deny the warmth spreading between them. She folded her arms tightly, as though trying to guard herself against the possibility that this man might actually care. The waiter brought food. Elias gestured again, and soon a plate of pasta sat before Amara, steaming hot. Naomi started to object, but Amara was already eating, laughing between bites as she colored. Elias watched, his own fork untouched. But this time, it wasn't loneliness that kept him from eating. It was fascination. He scrawled one more line across the napkin, sliding it toward Amara as she chewed. Dinner tastes better with company. She read it aloud, nodding sagely. Told you. Naomi caught the looks from nearby tables, some amused, some judgmental. But for once, she didn't care. As the night wound down, Amara carefully tore the finished drawing from her sketchbook. She slid it across the table to Elias. For you. So you don't forget. Elias accepted it with a reverence Naomi didn't expect. He folded it carefully, tucking it into the inner pocket of his jacket as though it were worth more than the watch on his wrist. Naomi rose, gathering Amara's things. It's late. We should go. Amara pouted but obeyed, hugging her colored pencils to her chest. See you next week, she asked Elias. Naomi bristled at the assumption. But Elias had already written the word on a fresh napkin. Yes. Amara grinned all the way out the door. Naomi lingered for a moment, meeting Elias's eyes. There was no arrogance in them, no demand, no hunger for anything but presence. It disarmed her more than wealth ever could. She looked away quickly, ushering her daughter into the night. Elias sat alone again. But this time, the seat across from him wasn't just empty. It was waiting. And tucked against his chest, the drawing pressed warm against his heart, a smile he hadn't seen in years, drawn by hands small enough to believe it was possible. The weeks that followed became a rhythm. Every Thursday evening, Elias Kane sat at his corner table, the clock ticking a little slower until the doors opened and Amara bounded in with her sketchbook clutched tight. Naomi trailed behind, cautious but less resistant with each passing week. The staff stopped whispering. The patrons, though still curious, grew used to the sight of a billionaire dining with a little girl in braids. And Elias himself began to change. His suit was still immaculate, his silence unbroken, but something in his eyes had shifted. The hollowness softened. He ate more. He even allowed himself the faintest curve of a smile when Amara laughed too loudly at her own drawings. The motif deepened. One week, Amara drew him standing beneath a rainbow, with her and Naomi holding his hands. Another, she drew him as a superhero, cape flowing, standing on a skyscraper. Elias had tucked each drawing away in a leather folder at home, though no one knew it. At night, when the penthouse echoed too loudly, he would open the folder and stare at the colors until the silence felt less suffocating. But change has a way of attracting shadows. It began on a gray Saturday afternoon. Naomi was leaving the grocery store, a bag of produce balanced on her hip, Amara skipping at her side. That was when the man appeared. Naomi. Her body stiffened. She hadn't heard that voice in years, but she knew it instantly. Derek Johnson leaned against the brick wall near the parking lot, hands shoved into the pockets of a leather jacket that had seen better days. His hair was thinner, his eyes sharper, but the smirk was the same, the one that had once charmed her and later broke her. Naomi's grip on the grocery bag tightened. "What do you want?" Amara froze, her braids swinging as she looked from her mother to the man. "Mama, who's that?" Naomi's stomach nodded. "Go wait by the car, Amara." But Derek crouched slightly, grinning at the girl. "You must be Amara. You've grown. Last time I saw you, you were just a baby." Amara's brow furrowed. "Do I know you?" Naomi stepped between them, her voice sharp. "She doesn't know you because you left. Now stay away from her." Derek's smile soured. "That's not fair. I'm her father." "You were her father," Naomi snapped. "When you cared. When you stayed." He raised a brow, leaning back casually, though his eyes glinted with calculation. "I heard you've been keeping interesting company lately." Elias Kane. The billionaire who doesn't talk. Naomi's blood ran cold. "Stay out of our business." Derek smirked wider. "Why should I? If Kane's got room at his table for you and the kid, maybe he's got room in his wallet, too. You always did have a taste for expensive things, Naomi." Her hand trembled against the grocery bag, but her voice held steady. "If you come near us again, I'll call the police." He shrugged. "Police can't keep a father from seeing his daughter." Naomi pulled Amara toward the car, her heart hammering. She didn't look back until the door was locked, her daughter safely inside. But when she did, Derek was still there, leaning against the wall, watching with a smile that promised trouble. The next Thursday at the restaurant, Naomi was quieter than usual. She sat with Amara at Elias's table, but her eyes flicked constantly toward the doors, her shoulders tense. Elias noticed. His gaze lingered, questioning. He tapped his pen against the napkin, then wrote. "Something wrong?" Naomi hesitated. She didn't want to drag him into her problems. She didn't want to confirm Derek's mocking suspicion that she was after money. But Amara, oblivious, piped up, "Mama saw a man at the store. He said he's my dad." Elias's pen stilled. He looked at Naomi. Her jaw tightened. "It's true. Derek Johnson. He left when Amara was a baby. No calls. No support. Nothing. Now he's back. And he's sniffing around because he heard about you." The pen moved quickly. "Does he threaten you?" Naomi let out a bitter laugh. "Not directly. He doesn't have to. Men like him, they're poison enough just by showing up." Elias tapped the napkin, his gaze firm. He wrote, "I'll help." Naomi stiffened. "No. That's exactly what he wants, to make me look like I'm using you. I won't let him have that power." Amara looked between them, confused. "But he said he's my dad. Doesn't that mean he cares now?" Naomi's heart broke a little at the question. "Baby, sometimes people say they care when they really don't." Elias's jaw clenched. His pen scratched the napkin. "He won't hurt you. Either of you." Naomi stared at the words. She wanted to believe them. But belief was dangerous. The shadow grew. Derek began to linger outside the diner where Naomi worked. He bumped into her at the market again, his tone half charming, half threatening. And once, Amara spotted him across the street from their apartment, watching. Naomi called the police, but without concrete threats, there was little they could do. Amara's drawings began to change. The rainbows grew darker, the figures smaller. One week, she drew Elias with his mouth sewn shut, Naomi pulling Amara away, and a shadowy figure looming in the corner. Elias's chest burned when he saw it. He tapped the sketch, then looked at Amara, his brows furrowed. "It's just a picture," she said, but her voice trembled. Elias wrote firmly. "No one will take you." Naomi read the words over her daughter's shoulder. For the first time, she didn't argue. Because deep down, she wanted it to be true. The breaking point came late one evening. Naomi was locking up after her shift when Derek appeared again, blocking her path. "You can't keep me out forever," he sneered. "I'll go to court if I have to. Judges love fathers who suddenly care. And when they hear about Cain, well, they'll have a field day." Naomi's fists clenched. "Stay away from us." But Derek leaned closer, his breath sour. "You really think a mute man's going to protect you? He can't even speak for himself." That was when Naomi realized, this wasn't just about her. Or Amara. Derek wanted to humiliate Elias, too. To twist his silence into weakness. And suddenly, the fragile bond that had begun over pasta and crayons felt like it was standing on the edge of a knife. The confrontation began on a Thursday. The restaurant was unusually crowded, the air buzzing with voices and the clatter of cutlery. Elias sat at his corner table, his posture more rigid than usual, his eyes flicking often to the door. He had grown accustomed to the rhythm of these evenings, Amara bursting in, Naomi close behind, the sketchbook opening like a window to light. But tonight, something in him pulsed with unease. When the doors opened, Amara skipped inside, smiling as always, clutching her colored pencils. Naomi followed, but her eyes darted quickly around the room. Her body was tense, like a violin string pulled too tight. Elias noticed. His fingers closed around a pen in his pocket. They had barely settled when it happened. The doors swung wide again, and Derek Johnson strode in. He was out of place in the gleaming restaurant. His leather jacket was cracked, his jeans frayed, but he carried himself with swagger, as if he belonged more than anyone else. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on Naomi and Amara seated across from Elias. His grin widened. "Naomi," he called, loud enough to draw attention. "Didn't know you'd upgraded to fine dining." Naomi's face drained of color. "Oh no," she whispered. Amara stiffened in her seat. "Mama." "Stay put," Naomi said firmly, squeezing her daughter's hand. She rose, moving quickly to intercept Derek before he could reach the table. "Get out," she hissed when she was close enough. "You have no right to be here." Derek's smirk didn't falter. "Relax. I just came to see my daughter. Haven't I got that right?" His gaze flicked past Naomi, to where Elias sat watching, silent and still. "And maybe to meet the man who thinks he can replace me." Naomi's stomach turned. "Don't you dare." But Derek brushed past her like she was nothing, striding to the table. He planted his hands on the linen and leaned toward Elias. "So. This is the great Elias Kane. Can't say I'm impressed." The room went still. Patrons turned to stare. Waiters froze mid-step. Elias's jaw tightened. He didn't move. Didn't blink. Derek laughed, loud and grating. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" "Oh, right. You don't have one anymore." Gasps rippled through the room. Naomi's face burned. Amara's small fists clenched on the table. Elias's hand moved slowly, pulling out his pen, writing on the napkin with deliberate strokes. "Leave." Derek snatched the napkin, waving it in the air like a prize. "Look at this." The mighty billionaire reduced to scribbling notes like a schoolboy. "And you too," he jabbed a finger toward Naomi and Amara, sitting here like his little pets. "What's he buying you with, huh? Pasta? Pencils?" Naomi's voice shook with fury. "That's enough." But Derek wasn't finished. He leaned even closer to Elias, his breath sour with mockery. "You think you can play father to a girl you barely know? You think silence makes you some kind of saint? You're nothing but a broken man hiding behind money." Elias's pen snapped in his grip. For the first time since the accident, anger flooded him, not the cold emptiness he carried, but hot, alive fury. His chest rose and fell, his eyes blazing. Amara's voice broke through the silence. "Stop it," she cried, standing on her chair, her braids swinging. "He's not nothing. He's better than you." The restaurant gasped again. A child defying a grown man, shouting down the chaos. Derek blinked, caught off guard for a moment. Then he sneered. "Better than me? He can't even talk." Amara's chin lifted, her small body trembling with courage. "He talks better without words than you do with them." Naomi pulled her daughter down, holding her close, her own body shaking. Elias's hand moved again. He grabbed a new napkin, writing quickly, his strokes sharp as knives. He held it up, his eyes locked on Derek's. "She is not yours to break." The words hung in the air. Simple. Final. For the first time, Derek's grin faltered. A murmur spread through the restaurant. People shifted in their seats, waiters exchanged looks, someone muttered, "Good for him." But Derek wasn't done. He straightened, his voice loud and ugly. "We'll see what the courts think. Money can buy a lot, Kane, but it can't buy my daughter." Naomi's voice cracked. "She's not yours. She hasn't been for years." Derek leaned close once more, his words meant only for Elias. "You don't scare me, mute. You're a broken man pretending to be whole. And I'll prove it." Then he turned and strode out, leaving silence in his wake. For a long moment, no one moved. The restaurant was thick with shock. Amara's lip trembled. She clutched her sketchbook to her chest, tears welling. "Mama, he's going to take me away, isn't he?" Naomi held her tighter, whispering, "No, baby. Not while I'm here." But her own eyes betrayed fear. Elias sat rigid, his hands trembling slightly against the table. His silence had always been his prison. Tonight, it had been used as a weapon against him. And for the first time, he realized silence alone would not protect the people who had become his only light. The breaking point had come. And there would be no going back. Elias Kane didn't sleep the night after Derek's outburst. He paced his penthouse like a man trapped between glass walls. The city glowed beneath him, a grid of light and motion, but all he saw was Amara's trembling lip, Naomi's fear, and Derek's sneer, "You're a broken man pretending to be whole." For 3 years, Elias had lived in silence, letting the world believe it was his choice. But now silence wasn't protecting him. Worse, it wasn't protecting them. He stood at the long windows until dawn, his hand pressed over the pocket of his jacket. Inside, Amara's latest drawing rested, 2 stick figures holding his hands, smiling. Her faith in him was scrawled in crayon. And for the first time, he asked himself if he was worthy of it. The following week, Elias arrived at the restaurant earlier than ever. His table was set, his napkin stacked, his pen uncapped. He waited, his chest tight, his resolve sharper than it had been in years. At 7:02, the doors opened. Amara burst in, sketchbook bouncing at her side. Naomi followed, her shoulders hunched as though expecting storm clouds to break over her head. She spotted Elias and managed a faint nod, but her eyes were wary. They had just begun to settle when the storm arrived. Derek Johnson entered, louder than the first time. He strode across the room with deliberate steps, his voice already raised. "Evening, everyone. Don't mind me, just here to see my family." Patrons murmured. Waiters stiffened. Naomi's face drained. She pulled Amara closer. "Not tonight, Derek. Please." Derek ignored her. His eyes locked on Elias, who sat unmoving at the corner table. And there he is. The great Elias Kane. Ready to play hero again? Elias's pen scratched quickly across the napkin. He held it up. "This ends tonight." Derek barked a laugh. "What, you gonna scribble me to death? You can't even speak." But Elias didn't rise to the bait. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folder. Calmly, he slid it across the table toward Derek. Confused, Derek snatched it up and flipped it open. His smirk faltered. Inside were photographs. Screenshots. Documents. Records Elias's people had gathered in less than a week, unpaid debts, assault charges swept under the rug, a police report from a bar fight, even a restraining order filed years ago by another woman. Naomi gasped when she saw the papers. Derek's face reddened. "You think this scares me?" Elias's pen moved swiftly. "Court will. Police will. Press will." Derek slammed the folder shut, his voice rising. "You don't get to decide what happens with my daughter." Amara's small voice pierced the air. "You left me." He didn't. The restaurant fell silent. Every eye turned to the little girl standing on her chair, her braids quivering. She held up her sketchbook, flipping it to a page she had drawn the night before. On it was a picture of 3 figures, Elias, Naomi, and herself, holding hands beneath a blazing sun. In the corner, a shadowy figure with no face stood outside a door, locked out. "This is my family now," she said, her voice trembling but strong. "And you're not in it." Gasps rippled across the room. Naomi's hand covered her mouth, tears streaming. Elias's throat constricted. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't expected it. But the child had drawn him into her family with nothing more than pencil and conviction. Derek's fists clenched. "You brainwashed her. Both of you. This isn't over." He started toward the table, but Elias rose at last. For years he had avoided standing in the spotlight, his silence his cage. Now he stepped forward, tall and unyielding. His eyes burned into Derek's. He didn't write. He didn't need to. His silence was no longer emptiness, it was power. Waiters moved quickly, security summoned. Derek cursed as two men in suits approached, the maitre d' already on the phone. But Elias took one final step closer, his presence alone forcing Derek back. The billionaire leaned down, his face inches from the man's. His lips parted, and though no sound came, his eyes spoke everything. "You will not touch them." Derek faltered. For the first time, his swagger cracked. Naomi's voice, low and firm, cut the air. "Get out, Derek. And don't come back." Security escorted him toward the doors, his protests echoing uselessly. When the doors finally shut behind him, the room exhaled. Patrons whispered, some clapped quietly. But at the table, all was still. Amara slid her drawing across to Elias. "See? I told you. You're in my family." Elias's hands trembled as he took it. Slowly, he reached for his pen, but Naomi stopped him. "You don't have to write," she whispered. "She already knows." For the first time since the crash, Elias felt tears burn his eyes. He clutched the drawing to his chest, his silence no longer a wound but a vow, to protect, to stand, to belong. That night, as the city stretched beneath him, Elias placed the drawing on his grand piano. Dust coated the keys, untouched for years, but the sight of the sketchbook page resting there lit something inside him. He sat, his fingers hovering. Then, softly, he pressed a single key. The note rang out, trembling, imperfect. But it was sound. His sound. Amara's drawing smiled from the piano top. Naomi's voice lingered in his memory. And Elias Kane, mute billionaire, realized his silence had finally been broken, not by words, but by love drawn in crayon. The restaurant felt different the following Thursday. For weeks, the corner table had been a stage for curiosity, whispers, even conflict. But tonight, it was something else. The staff no longer watched with unease, they moved with a kind of protective loyalty. Patrons glanced over not with judgment, but with something closer to respect. Elias sat at his usual seat, though nothing about him felt usual anymore. His suit was still impeccable, his posture erect, but there was a softness in his eyes. In front of him lay not just a napkin and pen, but a carefully folded drawing Amara had given him the week before, the one where she had declared him family. He had carried it everywhere, tucked against his chest like a shield. The doors opened. Naomi entered first this time, holding Amara's hand. There was no hesitation in her step. Her chin was high, her gaze steady. She wasn't just walking into a restaurant anymore, she was walking into a choice she had resisted for weeks. Amara spotted Elias and tugged free of her mother's grip, running across the floor with her sketchbook bouncing at her side. "You waited for us," she exclaimed, climbing onto her chair. Elias tapped his chest gently, then pointed at the folded drawing. He opened it, holding it up. 3 figures smiling beneath a blazing sun. Amara beamed. "See? It came true." Naomi joined them at the table, sliding into the seat with less reluctance than ever before. She studied Elias for a long moment, then said quietly, "The police came by. They took Derek in. Apparently, someone provided them with quite a stack of evidence." Her eyes flicked to the leather folder peeking from Elias's briefcase. "That was you, wasn't it?" Elias didn't deny it. He lifted his pen and wrote on the napkin. "He can't hurt you now." Naomi's breath hitched. She looked at her daughter, then back at Elias. "Why? Why do you care?" Elias paused. He looked at Amara, then at Naomi, and wrote slowly, deliberately. "Because you cared first." Naomi's throat tightened. She remembered the first night Amara had marched to his table, blurting out her fearless honesty. She remembered her own outrage, her suspicion, her desperate need to shield her child. But she also remembered the way Elias had raised his hand to protect Amara from being removed, the way he had eaten when she told him to, the way he had silently declared her daughter's honesty a gift, not a burden. She exhaled shakily. I've spent years teaching Amara not to trust men. Not to trust promises. Not to believe in anything that could break her. But she believes in you. Elias held her gaze. Then he reached for the sketchbook, flipping to a blank page. He picked up Amara's pencil and, with steady hands, drew 3 stick figures, 1 tall, 2 smaller, holding hands. Beneath it, in bold block letters, he wrote a single word. Family. Amara gasped. Naomi pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Elias pushed the book toward them, his expression unyielding. Naomi's eyes filled with tears. Slowly, she placed her hand atop his on the sketchbook. Then maybe it's time I stop fighting it. The room seemed to exhale with her. Dinner that night was different. Elias didn't just watch Amara eat, he ate with her, matching her bites, even pausing when she paused. Naomi relaxed into her chair, laughing once when Amara insisted he try her dessert. Elias complied, his lips twitching into what was, undeniably, a smile. For the first time in years, the billionaire wasn't dining alone. Later, outside the restaurant, the night air was cool and clean. The city lights glimmered, the hum of traffic distant. Naomi held Amara's hand as they walked to the curb. Elias followed, his silence no longer an isolating wall but a steady presence beside them. Amara tugged her mother's sleeve. Can we come back next week? Naomi glanced at Elias. He was watching her, waiting, not assuming, not demanding, just waiting. Naomi squeezed her daughter's hand. Yes, she said softly. We can. Amara cheered, twirling in her sneakers. Elias's chest loosened. For 3 years, he had lived with a silence that felt like death. Tonight, it felt like life. As they said goodnight, Amara pressed something into his palm. He looked down. It was a small, hand-drawn picture, herself, Naomi, and Elias standing together, but this time with a 4th object beside them, a piano, its keys blazing with color. You should play again, she said. Music is just another way of talking. Elias stared at the drawing, the weight of it settling into him like destiny. Naomi watched quietly. She didn't stop her daughter this time. She didn't argue, didn't pull her away. Instead, she touched Elias's arm briefly, gently, before turning to guide Amara down the sidewalk. Elias stood at the curb long after they left, the drawing burning warm in his palm. He wasn't alone anymore. And he never would be again. The piano had waited in silence as long as he had. For 3 years, it had stood in the corner of Elias Kane's penthouse, covered in dust, a monument to everything he had lost. He had walked past it daily, never daring to touch it, as though pressing a single key would remind him too sharply of the voice he no longer had. But tonight, the piano was no longer a tomb. Tonight, a child's drawing sat on its polished surface, 3 figures smiling, a blazing sun overhead, and a piano glowing with color. Amara's faith, sketched in crooked lines and bright crayon, had broken through his silence in a way no doctor, no therapist, no business success ever had. Elias sat before the piano, his hands trembling above the keys. His jacket pocket held another drawing, the one where Amara had written him into her family. And on his desk, Naomi's words lingered in memory, she believes in you. For the first time in years, Elias believed too. He pressed a key. A single note rang out, shaky but clear. He pressed another. Then another. Soon, a melody began to take shape, not perfect, not polished, but alive. The sound filled the vast penthouse, chasing away the heavy silence. Naomi and Amara sat on the sofa, watching. Amara's eyes sparkled, her small hands clapping in rhythm. Naomi leaned forward, her lips parted, her chest rising and falling as though each note loosened something inside her too. Elias's fingers moved more surely now. The music swelled, not the practiced performance of a concert pianist, but the raw, imperfect language of a man learning to speak again through his hands. And in that moment, silence was no longer a curse. It was the canvas for sound. When the final chord faded, the room held its breath. Amara was the first to break it. She hopped off the couch, ran to him, and threw her arms around his waist. "See," she whispered against his chest. "You can talk." Naomi joined slowly, her eyes shimmering. She touched his shoulder, steady and sure. "And we hear you, Elias. We hear you loud and clear." His throat burned, but he didn't need words. He held them both, the weight of grief finally lifting, replaced by something he hadn't felt in years, belonging. Later that night, Amara insisted on one last drawing. She sprawled across the carpet with her pencils, tongue between her teeth, working furiously. When she finished, she held it up proudly. This time, the picture was of the three of them standing on a stage. Elias at the piano, Naomi by his side, Amara in the front row cheering. Above the scene, in bold purple letters, she had written, "The billionaire who found his voice." Naomi blinked back tears. Elias took the drawing in both hands, his vision blurring as he studied it. Then he looked at Amara, his chest swelling with something deeper than gratitude, stronger than silence. He tapped the words on the page, then pressed a hand over his heart. Amara grinned. Naomi smiled too, her eyes locking with his in quiet understanding. For once, Elias didn't feel broken. He didn't feel mute. He felt whole. The city outside glittered, unaware of the quiet miracle in the penthouse above. But for those three souls, the world had shifted forever. Because sometimes, it doesn't take words to save a man. Sometimes, it only takes the honesty of a child, the courage of a mother, and a sketchbook full of crayons. And when silence is finally broken, not by sound, but by love, it can echo louder than any voice ever could.